The man had already nailed a folding table to nothing, to the air, it seemed, right across the worn, pale line of stone where Corwin Vane had stood his post for 9 years, by the time I came around the gatehouse at 9:30. He was loud before he saw me. He was the kind of loud that fills a forecourt the way smoke fills a room, finding every corner, leaving nothing clean. Tickets, tickets, best seats in the house. You'll never get closer than this. Only from me, only from me. And he had set himself up so that a guardsman in a red tunic, motionless, eyes forward, made the perfect backdrop for his trade. He had chosen Corwin the way a peddler chooses a wall to lean his ladder on. He thought the wall could not object. I want to tell you before anything else what Corwin Vane looks like when he is being shouted around. He looks like nothing at all. That is the whole art of it, and it is harder than any drill. The bearskin sits dead level. The chin strap cuts a line you could measure. The white gloves are folded over the rifle, and the rifle is grounded just so, and the eyes go past you to a point on the far railing that has never once, in all the years I have watched him, blinked back. People mistake that for emptiness. I have soldiered beside the man, and I can tell you it is the opposite. There is a great deal going on behind that face. None of it is for sale. I am Havern. I keep the morning watch on the south arch of the Aldermore forecourt, the wide pale apron of stone in front of the old water gate, where the public come up the river steps and the household come down the long colonnade, and the two never quite meet. Corwin keeps the box by the inner railing, the post nearest the gate itself, the most photographed 3 square feet in the kingdom. We change at the chime. We do not speak on duty. I tell you that so you understand that for the first part of this, I could do nothing but watch. And watching, when a man is wronging your brother in arms and you may not move, is its own kind of weight. The tout's name, we learned later, was Felix Drain, though by the time we learned it the name had stopped mattering. That morning he was only the man with the table and the lanyard he'd printed himself, and the fan of glossy cards he kept snapping like a card sharp at a fair. He had picked his spot with a trader's eye, right where the river steps crowd crested onto the apron, where they were tired and dazzled and hadn't yet found the proper booth 50 yards on under the colonnade, the one with the real seal and the real prices. He stood across Corwin's line so that to reach the gate at all you had to come past him first, and past his patter, and past the cards he pushed at your chest. And behind him, like a painting, he had hung himself in front of the KingsGuard, unmoving, unable to wave anyone off. The best free advertising a swindler ever stole. Don't queue with the Muppets, friend, I've got the front row, look, face value's a joke, I'll do you a deal. He half turned and slapped the air an inch from Corwin's sleeve, not touching, theatrical. Even Matey here'd tell you if he was allowed to talk. Go on, son, nod for the nice people. The crowd laughed the uneasy laugh of people who don't know the rules. Corwin's eyes did not leave the railing. A muscle I have learned to read, the one at the corner of his jaw, set a fraction harder. That was all. That was the whole reply. I have seen the touts before, of course. They drift up the river in fair weather like wasps to a jam jar, and the marshals move them along, and they grumble and go and come back the next week. But I had not before seen one set up directly on a sentry's mark, square across the line, as if the pale stone the guard stands on were a market pitch he had paid for. There is a thing about that line you should understand. It is not painted. It is worn. A century of polished boots, the same 18 inches of stone, have rubbed it paler than the rest, so that the post a guard holds is written into the ground itself by every man who ever held it. To set a table on it is not like blocking a doorway. It is like spreading your wares on a grave because the slab makes a level surface. Drain did not know that and would not have cared. To him, the pale stone was just the brightest patch of forecourt, and the man on it the best mannequin he'd ever found. A marshal came at the quarter, young Pell, 2 months on the river detail, decent and out of his depth. He came up with his clipboard and his lanyard the right way round and said the right words. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to take your stall off the forecourt. There's a license point for ticket sales under the colonnade. You can't trade on the apron, and you certainly can't trade on a sentry's post. All correct. All useless. Drain turned on him with the wide, delighted grin of a man who has had this conversation 100 times and won it 99. Trade? Who's trading? I'm a tourist, son. I'm chatting to my mate the soldier. It's a free country. You going to arrest me for talking? He flicked one of his cards so it spun and landed on Pell's clipboard. Tell you what, since your official comp ticket on the house, lovely seat, you bring the wife. We're all friends. And he laughed and the crowd laughed because Pell flushed and didn't have the next line, and Drain reached out and patted the boy's shoulder twice, propriety, and went straight back to his patter as though the marshal were furniture. Tickets, tickets, only from me. Pell looked over at Corwin. I saw it. It is the thing the young ones always do. They look to the still man because the still man looks like he has the answer. And of course Corwin could give him nothing. Not a word, not a glance, not the smallest tilt of the head. The discipline that makes the post sacred is the same discipline that ties his hands, while a swindler stands on his mark and pats his marshal on the head. Pell stood there a moment with the comp ticket fluttering on his clipboard, then went off across the apron toward the gatehouse phone to call it up the chain, because that is what you do, and Drain crowed at his back. Off you pop, and the morning rolled on, and the cards kept snapping, and the pale line stayed covered, and I stood on my arch and felt the slow burn that a soldier feels when the rules he loves are the very rope around his wrists. What I did not yet know, what none of us on the forecourt knew that bright loud morning, was that Felix Drain had done this before, in other forecourts, behind other still men, and had always gotten away with it because the still men could not point, and the marshals could not catch him in the one act that counted. He thought he had found the perfect crime, a backdrop that cannot accuse you, a witness sworn to silence, a pitch he didn't own and never could, on a stone that belonged to 100 years of better men than him. He thought the worst that could happen was being asked politely to move along. He was about to learn what happens when a man like that finally lays a hand on a man like Corwin Vane, and discovers, far too late, that the silence he'd been trading on had been keeping a very careful account. The call up the chain takes time, and Drain knew it took time, and he traded on the time. That is the swindler's whole craft, if you watch it long enough. He is fast where everyone around him must be slow. By 10, he had sold a dozen of his glossy cards to people who would find at the gate that the seats did not exist or were free anyway. By 1/2 he had moved his table 6 inches deeper onto the apron, toward the railing, toward Corwin, because the river crowd was thickening and he wanted them funneled tight. By 11 he had a second man, a lookout, sullen and skinny, who lounged against the gatehouse corner and watched for marshals so Drain could fold the lanyard into his pocket the instant one appeared, and unfold it the instant they passed. They were a practice pair. I had the strong, cold feeling I had seen the shape of it before without ever seeing the men. A real family came up the steps at 11, 2 small ones and a grandmother who walked with a stick, the kind of people the morning is supposed to be for. Drain was on them before they'd caught their breath. "Front row, madam, last 2, your little ones'll never forget it." The grandmother fumbled for her purse because she did not know there was a free spot 50 yards on, because the man in the printed lanyard sounded official and stood beside a real soldier, and the soldier did not contradict him. She counted out notes that she had counted twice at home. I would put my pay on it, and Drain folded them away smooth as a card trick and pressed 2 worthless glosses into the smaller child's hands and said, "There you go, little man, mind you don't lose 'em," and turned to the next mark before the family had even moved off. And here is the thing I will carry. Corwin's eyes were forward, fixed on the railing as they must be. But I was on the arch at the angle, and I saw what the crowd could not. When the grandmother handed over her notes, the white glove on the rifle tightened. Just the knuckles, just for a breath. A man who has trained for years to give nothing away gave away, to me alone, exactly how much it cost him to stand still while an old woman was fleeced 2 feet from his boots. Then the knuckles eased and the face was stone again, and he held. He held because the post is bigger than the morning, and the post does not care that your heart is breaking. That is the part the touts never understand. They think the stillness means he does not see. The stillness is the price he pays to keep seeing clearly. It was near noon when the senior marshal came, and with him the answer Drain had been counting the minutes against. Sergeant Marshal Oakes is gray and unhurried and has worked the river apron longer than Drain has been swindling it. He did not flush. He did not look to Corwin for an answer. He planted himself square in front of the table, read the ballon number off by heart, and said, "You're not chatting and you're not a tourist. You've taken money on crown ground at a sentry's post. Fold the table, take your cards, and walk to the colonnade office with me, or this becomes a matter for the constables. Your choice, and you've got the time it takes me to say it twice." For the first time that morning the grin slipped. Not far, but it slipped. The lookout pushed off the gatehouse wall and drifted. And Felix Drain did the thing that men like him do when the easy room runs out. He got loud, and he got physical, and he made the mistake he had spent his whole grubby career avoiding. He swept the cards off the table into his bag fast, and as Oakes reached calmly to fold the legs, Drain shoved the table sideways, into Corwin's mark, into the railing hard, and the steel edge of it cracked against the post box and skidded, and Drain snarled, "Get it off me, then go on, you stand there all day, you can shift a table." And he put both hands flat on Corwin Vane's chest and shoved him. I want to be precise about this, because everything that came after turned on these 2 seconds, and because 100 phones on that forecourt turned on them too. Drain shoved a soldier of the KingsGuard, two-handed, square in the chest, with the full theatrical force of a man performing his own innocence, shoved him to provoke, to make the still man stagger or swing, to get on film either a comic statue knocked off his perch or a brute in a bearskin lashing out at a harmless seller. Either one would have served Drain, a stagger he could laugh at, a swing he could sue. He got neither. Corwin took the shove the way a sea wall takes a wave. He gave a half-inch and no more. I saw the rifle butt shift on the stone and grind back, and then he was exactly where he had been, on the pale line, eyes forward, and the only thing in the whole forecourt that had moved was Felix Drain, who had pushed off a wall and rocked back onto his own heels, surprised, the way you're surprised when a door you expected to swing turns out to be a beam. The crowd made a sound, not a cheer, a kind of intake, the sound a room makes when something true happens in front of it. The phones, every one of them had it. And Drain, who lived by the phones, made his second mistake because he could not read the silence. He thought the door had merely failed to open. He did not understand that the door had just become a wall on 100 screens, and that the wall had his handprints on its chest. "You saw that?" Drain shouted at the crowd, wheeling, playing to them. "You all saw he came at me, but the crowd was not his anymore. The grandmother with the stick had turned at the top of the steps. She was pointing her stick at him, and her voice carried thin and furious across the apron. 'You took my money, you wicked man,' and that soldier never moved." And that, an old woman's stick, leveled like a saber across a crowned forecourt, was the moment the morning turned, though Drain would not feel the full weight of the turn for hours yet, and would spend those hours digging the hole deeper with his own loud hands. Because Sergeant Marshal Oakes had not flushed and had not looked away and had been holding a small black radio at his side the entire time, he keyed it once. Apron to gatehouse. Assault on a sentry, witnessed, suspect contained. Constables to the old water gate. He said it the way a man reads a weather report, and he looked at Felix Drain with no anger in his gray face at all, which is the most frightening way an old soldier can look at you, and said, "You should not have touched him." Drain bolted. Of course he did. The lookout was already gone, vanished down the river steps the moment the radio came out, abandoning his partner the way that kind always do, and Drain snatched his bag off the buckled table and broke for the colonnade, shouldering through the crowd, scattering glossy cards behind him like a man throwing ballast off a sinking boat. It would have worked on a quiet morning, but it was not a quiet morning. There were 2 of us on the apron in red, sworn to the post and unable to chase. There was Oakes, too old to run. And there was, between Drain and the only open mouth of the colonnade, a press of the very people he had spent the morning fleecing. The grandmother stuck out her stick. I will not pretend it was a heroic stroke. It was an old woman who had been robbed, planting a walking stick across a thief's shins because she was angry and it was the only weapon she had. Drain's own speed did the rest. He went down on the cold stone in a tangle of bag and cards and his printed lanyard, and the breath went out of him in a flat grunt, and before he could gather his legs under him, the crowd had closed, not a mob, nothing ugly, just a wall of ordinary backs and folded arms, fathers and shopkeepers and a man with a rolled newspaper, standing in his way the people stand for the still man when the still man cannot stand for himself. They did not touch him. They simply did not let him through. And Felix Drain, on his knees on a crown forecourt with his swindle scattered around him, looked up into a hedge of unfriendly faces and understood, perhaps for the first time, that the silent soldier behind him had never been the only witness on the apron. He had merely been the only one too disciplined to point. The constables came at a jog from the gatehouse, 2 of them, and a third up the river steps cutting off the bolt hole the lookout had used. They lifted Drain by the elbows, not roughly, and the moment they had him he changed costumes the way he changed lanyards. The snarl became a whine, the swindler became the victim, smooth, instant, professional. "I'm the one assaulted here, officers. I want that on record. That soldier struck me. You've got it on film. I went down hard." "You went down on a walking stick, Sunshine," said the older constable who had clearly worked the river apron too. "And the soldier hasn't moved a boot. We'll have the film. We'll have all of it." He nodded at the ring of raised phones, every one of them still recording, 100 small, unblinking eyes. Drain looked at them, and for a half-second the practiced face went somewhere I almost felt sorry for, the look of a man who has just realized that the audience he played to all morning is going to be the jury. They sat him on the stone step by the gatehouse to wait for the van, a constable either side, and the apron began slowly to put itself back together. A marshal righted the buckled table. Young Pell, who had been made a fool of 3 hours before, moved quietly through the crowd with his clipboard, and now nobody laughed at him. He was taking names, witnesses. The grandmother first, her hand still trembling on her stick, dictating the sum she had been cheated of down to the last coin. The family she'd come up the steps with, the man with the newspaper. A pair of students who had filmed the whole thing from the railing and were already, half shy and half proud, offering their phones. By the time the police van rolled up to the old water gate, Pell had 9 names and would have more by the afternoon, and not one of them had a kind word for Felix Drain. Through all of it, Corwin Vane stood his post. I want you to sit with that because it is the whole of him. The man who had been shoved did not turn to watch his attacker arrested. He did not glance at the crowd that had risen for him, or the old woman who had felled the thief, or the constables, or the wreck of the table against his railing. He faced the far railing and the point on it he always faces, and he held the line, the pale worn line that 100 years of better men had rubbed into the stone, exactly as if nothing at all had happened on it. The chime came. I marched down off the south arch and we changed, the way we always change, without a word, our boots striking the stone in the only conversation the post allows. As I took the inner box and he stepped off, the only thing he gave me was the smallest thing in the world, a single slow blink, and the corner of the jaw easing, and I understood it completely. It said, held. It said, it's recorded. It said, go and stand, brother, the morning isn't over. And then he was a private citizen for 40 minutes off the line, and even then he did not go and gloat at the man on the step. He went and stood with the grandmother until her hands were steady, and he said something to her I could not hear, and she nodded, and that was the only protocol Corwin Vane broke all day. He stayed with the wronged until she was no longer afraid, and then he came back and relieved me, and we did not speak of it, because there was nothing a soldier needs to say about doing his duty. But the mourning was not the end of it. The mourning was only the part that the crowd saw and filmed. What the crowd could not see was the slow, patient machinery that a shove on a sentry's post sets grinding. The machinery that does not care how fast a swindler talks, because it moves at the speed of paper and witnesses, and the law, and it does not get tired, and it does not laugh at clever men. And once it has your handprints on a soldier's chest, it does not let go. It started that same afternoon in the Colonnade office, where Sergeant Marshal Oakes sat down with a constable and a stack of statement forms and began, in his unhurried gray hand, to write the morning down. Time, place, the pale line. The table moved 6 inches and then 6 more. The lanyard folded and unfolded. The grandmother's notes. The shove, 2 hands, flat, full force, square on the chest of a guardsman who gave half an inch and held. And underneath it all, the thing Oakes had clocked the moment Drain opened his mouth, the thing that turned a bad morning into the end of a man's whole grubby trade, that Felix Drain had done this before. Because the student's film, once it was up, did what film does now. It traveled. And by the time the household's own people sat down to watch it that evening, and they did watch it, every frame, the whole chain of them from the gate sergeant up, they were not the only ones watching. 3 other forecourts in 3 other towns had a marshal who recognized the lanyard, the patter, the trick of the folded credential, and the still soldier used as a backdrop. The pitch he didn't own, it turned out, was the only kind of pitch Felix Drain had ever worked. He had a method, and a method is a confession that takes its time. I learned most of what follows the way a guardsman learns anything in pieces, off duty, over the long weeks while the wheel turned. I set it down here in order, but understand that none of it felt orderly while it happened. It felt like waiting. It felt like standing a post you cannot see. The charges came first, and there were more of them than Drain had bargained for, because he had given the law a buffet. There was the trading without license on Crown ground, which was the small one, the one he'd shrugged off in a dozen forecourts before. There was obtaining money by deception, the grandmother's notes, the worthless glosses, multiplied by every other mark the constables could trace, and they traced a good many, because once the film was up the marks came forward, ashamed and angry, one after another, holding their useless cards. There was a public order count for the bolt through a crowded forecourt. And there was the one that mattered most, the one that put the iron in all the rest, assault. Not assault on an ordinary man. Assault on a sentry of the KingsGuard in the execution of his duty, on the post he was set to hold. Oakes told me later in his dry way that there is a particular gravity the law reserves for laying hands on a soldier who is forbidden to lay hands back. The discipline that ties his wrists, he said, is the same discipline the court protects. If a man could shove a sentry for sport because the sentry mayn't shove back, the post would mean nothing. So the post means everything. That's the bargain. Your friend kept his half of it perfectly. Now the law keeps its half. I thought that was about the finest thing I had ever heard said about my trade, and I have not forgotten it. The marks came forward slowly at first, then in a steady stream, once the film had traveled and people recognized the lanyard and the grin and the patter. A young couple who had spent their savings on what they thought were the best seats for an anniversary and found at the gate that the cards were nothing. A schoolteacher who had bought a dozen group tickets for children who would have walked in free. A foreign visitor who had not even understood, until a friend translated the film for him, that he had been robbed at all. Each one was a small shame carried alone. That is how the swindle works. It makes every victim feel a private fool, and each one, seeing the others, felt the shame turn to something cleaner, the plain anger of an honest person who has been cheated and means to say so. Pell took every statement himself, patient and careful, and the stack on Oak's desk grew thick. A swindler's whole defense is that no single mark will bother to come. Felix Drain's defense fell apart one statement at a time. Drain fought it naturally. He had won this argument 99 times, and he did not understand that the 100th was different in kind. His line, through his solicitor, was the one he'd shouted on the apron. He was the victim. He'd been manhandled by a soldier. He'd gone down hard. There was a film. And there was a film that was his whole defense, and it was the rope he hanged himself with. Because the film he was counting on did not show what he remembered. Memory had told Drain a story in which a brute in a bearskin shoved him to the ground. The film told the room the truth, frame by patient frame. A man sweeping cards off a table, a man shoving the table into the railing, a man putting two flat hands on a soldier's chest and pushing with his whole weight, and a soldier who gave half an inch and held, eyes forward, hands on his grounded rifle, who did not so much as turn his head. The fall the constable had named on the apron was the grandmother's stick and Drain's own bolt. There was no frame, in any of the 100 phones, in which Corwin Vane moved against him. You cannot fake what 100 strangers filmed from 100 angles. The clever man's best trick, the one he'd built his whole life on, getting the still man as a backdrop, turned out to be the one that ruined him, because the still man, standing exactly where the law required, was the perfect, incorruptible witness to his own innocence and Drain's guilt. Stillness, it turns out, is very hard to argue with. Then the pattern came in, and the pattern is what took it out of the realm of a bad morning and into the realm of a man's reckoning. The 3 marshals from the 3 other forecourts gave their statements. A pattern of obtaining money by deception across multiple jurisdictions is not a man having a bad day. It is a man's profession. The court does not weigh a profession the way it weighs an accident. And every one of those marshals said the same striking thing in their own words, that Drain always set up at a sentry's post, always used the soldier as his backdrop, always because he had learned that the one man who could most clearly see the swindle was the one man sworn never to speak of it. He had built a career on the silence of disciplined men. He had mistaken their silence for blindness. It is the oldest mistake the arrogant make about the disciplined, and it is always, in the end, the most expensive. The household did its part quietly and without drama, which is its way. There was no proclamation, no scene. There was simply a letter, on heavy crown paper, entered into the court record and copied to every gate and forecourt the household keeps, that the person named, having assaulted a sentry on crown ground and defrauded members of the public at a crown approach, was henceforth barred from all forecourts, gates, approaches, and ceremonial grounds of the household in perpetuity, and that any attempt to enter would be a trespass actionable at once. A ban. Not loud, not vengeful, just the door, every door, closed against him for the rest of his days, the one place his whole trade had depended on shut to him forever. The pitch he didn't own was now a pitch he could never set foot on again. There was a kind of justice in the shape of it that I admired more than any fine. The man who had treated a sacred line as a market stall would never again stand on so much as the public stone in front of it. And there was a fine, and there was an order to repay. The grandmother first by name, every coin she had counted twice at home returned to her with the court's compulsion behind it, and every other mark after her as they could be found. The fine was steep enough to be felt, steeper for the deception counts than the assault, because the court took a long, sober view of a man who fleeced a grandmother and her grandchildren at the gate of their own kingdom. But it was the assault that fixed the record. It was the assault that meant the word against Felix Drain's name in the registers was not nuisance or unlicensed seller, the words he'd worn lightly for years, but a word with weight, convicted of assaulting a KingsGuard in the execution of his duty. That word does not wash off. It follows a man into every room he tries to talk his way out of for the rest of his life. The sentencing morning, I was on the South Arch again, and I confess I thought about it more than a guardsman should think about anything but his post. I did not see it, of course. I heard it that evening, the way I heard all of it, that Drain had stood in the dock and tried, one last time, the only thing he knew how to do, which was to talk. That he had told the court he was a small man making a small living, and the soldier had never even been hurt, not really, what was the harm in a shove? And that the magistrate, and this part I had from Oakes, who was there to give the formal account of the post, had let him finish, and then said mildly that the harm in a shove was the whole of it. That the guardsman's restraint was not the absence of injury but the presence of discipline, and that the law existed precisely so that a man's discipline was never a license for another man's contempt. He did not strike you, the magistrate was reported to have said, because he is better trained than you are provoking. That is not a defense for you. That is the reason you are here. Drain had no answer to that. For the first time in his loud life, I imagine, he had no answer at all. The clever mouth had finally met a room it could not sell, and the silence that fell on him then was not the disciplined silence of a soldier. It was the other kind, the kind that closes over a man when he understands, all at once and far too late, exactly what he has done and exactly what it has cost him. The grandmother got her money back. I want to end near her, because she is the part of it that matters more than the man on the step. Her name was Mrs. Ardith Penhallow, and a week after the sentencing she came back up the river steps onto the apron, slow on her stick, with the two small ones in their good coats, and this time there was no one to fleece them at the top, only the proper booth under the colonnade with its real seal and its honest prices, and Pell, confirmed to the river detail now, and standing 2 inches taller for it to point the way. She did not come for the seats. She came to see Corwin. She stood off his line, the way the wise ones learned to, and she waited for the chime, and when he stepped off and was a citizen for 40 minutes, she pressed something into his white glove. He told me afterward what it was. It was a single coin from the money the court had returned to her, the same money, she said, that he had stood beside and could not save when the wicked man took it. She wanted him to have one piece of it back because, she said, the soldier who would not move was the reason she had it at all. He tried to refuse it. You may not take payment on the post, and he is a stickler past all reason. But she closed his glove over it with both her old hands and said, "It's not payment, son. It's a thank you. There's a difference, and you of all people know it." And Corwin Vane, who did not flinch when a thief shoved him with 2 hands, stood there on the forecourt with a coin in his fist and could not for a moment speak. He kept the coin. He carries it still. He says it reminds him what the line is for. Because that is the thing the morning taught me, watching from the south arch with my own hands tied by the same discipline that tied his. We are not statues. The tourists who line up to make us laugh, who lean and shout and wave their hands an inch from our sleeves, they think the stillness is a trick, a game, a man pretending to be furniture for their amusement. They are wrong about it the way Felix Drain was wrong about it, and his wrongness cost him everything. The stillness is not nothing. The stillness is the most that a man can do. It is the choice, made fresh every single second, to hold the line that better men wore into the stone before you, no matter who shouts across it, no matter who sets his table on it, no matter who lays his hands on your chest to make you break. The thief mistook the post for a backdrop. He mistook the silence for blindness. He mistook the discipline for weakness, and the law for something he could outrun. He was wrong on every count, and the being wrong arrived for him slowly and completely, in the only language that lasts. A record, a verdict, a fine, a barred door, and an old woman's coin closed into a soldier's glove. There is a kind of man who believes the world belongs to whoever is loudest in it. He sets up his table where he pleases and pushes whoever stands in his way, and for a long time it works, because the patient and the discipline do not stop him in the moment, they cannot, and he counts on it. But patience is not surrender, and discipline is not blindness, and the silence of a good man standing his post is not an empty thing waiting to be filled by a louder voice. It is a witness. It keeps an account. And the day a man like that finally lays his hands on a man like Corwin Vane, the account comes due all at once. Corwin is on the inner box this morning as I write the last of this down. I can see him from the south arch, the bearskin dead level, the chin strap a measured line, the white gloves folded on the grounded rifle, the eyes gone past me to the point on the far railing that has never once blinked back. The pale, worn line is under his boots, the same 18 inches of stone that 100 years of better men rubbed paler than the rest. There is no table on it now, and there never will be again while men like him are set to hold it. The river crowd comes up the steps, dazzled and tired, and finds the honest booth and the kind word and the soldier who will not move. And not one of them will ever know how close the morning came to being something uglier, or how it was held, by the smallest correct thing a man can do, which is to stand exactly where he is sworn to stand, and let the loud world break itself against him. He never moved. That was the whole of his answer, and it was enough. The pitch was never his to lose, and the post was never his to leave, and in the end the only man on that forecourt who lost anything at all was the one who thought a silent soldier was a thing he could safely shove. The line is still there. The man on it is still there. And that, I have come to believe, is the truest kind of justice there is, not loud, not quick, not a blow returned, but a line held, and a wrong made right by the slow, honest weight of everyone who finally stood where the still man could not.